Welcome to the wide world of evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's video, we will discuss the role of evidence in the debate round, the main components of good evidence, and how to find, cut, and format evidence. So let's get started. You may have done research and cited sources for your papers and essays in your other classes. But this type of research is much different and much more intense. But believe it or not, it can also be fun and rewarding. There's no better feeling than finding that perfect piece of evidence. Okay, so there might be some better feelings, but finding great evidence is up there. Evidence in a debate is a lot like expert witness in a courtroom trial. And just as good lawyers have to work hard to find experts who can testify on their behalf, good debaters have to work hard to find evidence to support their claims. And before we get started, here's a fun debate history lesson. Many decades ago, debaters used index cards to organize their evidence, and each piece of evidence was typed or pasted onto an index card and organized into long file drawers. To this day, there are many coaches and thus many debaters who refer to pieces of evidence as cards. So if you're in a debate round and hear someone say, for example, "We read two solvency cards," they aren't talking about the 9 of hearts or the 2 of diamonds. They're talking about pieces of evidence. There are lots of debate judges out there who don't like the word card to describe a piece of evidence, but the term card just seems to be just as popular as ever. So if you find yourself using the term card, that's okay. But when possible, try to refer to them as pieces of evidence or just evidence. Now for today's video, I'm going to show you an article on the topic of homework, because you might be watching this video as part of your homework. So let's get started. There are 3 parts to every piece of evidence: the tagline, the citation, and the body. Here's a piece of evidence that we might use in our homework assignment. At first, this might look a little overwhelming and tiny. There's a lot of formatting that makes it look more complex than it really is. So let's break it down into the 3 parts of a piece of evidence: the tagline, the citation, and the body. First, we start with the tagline. A tagline is an accurate summary of the body of the evidence. In this case, the tagline says, "Eliminating homework results in a drop in test scores." Note that the tagline is not excessively wordy. It's short, to the point, and accurately summarizes the main points of the evidence. When we take a look at the body of the evidence later on in this video, you'll see that researchers found that eliminating homework is correlated with a drop in test scores. Now, this might mean that these students are less prepared for college, or it might mean that fewer students graduate. But the evidence doesn't claim that these things are true, so neither can the tagline. Tagline should simply be the author's claim or main argument, and the text of the card provides the warrants or proof for why the claims are true. Taglines that exaggerate or fabricate or hyperbolize an author's claims are power tagged, and power tagging taglines can get you into a lot of trouble. Good teams will read your evidence closely, and if there are no warrants in the evidence to support the claims in your tagline, judges will not only disregard that evidence, which leaves you with no evidence to support your claims, but they may start to question your other pieces of evidence. So don't power tag, and don't let other teams power tag. Now let's go to the citation, which is the publication data that allows us to know who wrote the evidence and where the evidence was published. In this case, Robert Marzano and Deborah Pickering wrote an article titled "The Case For and Against Homework" in a journal titled Educational Leadership, published by an organization called ASCD. It was published in March of 2007 on pages 74 to 79. We've also included the author's qualifications, which were available at the bottom of the article on the webpage. And we've included the URL so that we can see where it was published on the internet as well. The good news is that you don't always have to read full citations. Instead, you might notice that the author's last names and the year in which it was published are in bold. Bold text in evidence indicates words that should be read out loud, whereas text that is not bolded does not need to be read out loud. Most tournaments require only the author's last name and the year the evidence was published. However, the national speech and debate tournaments, which include the district tournament and national tournament, require the publication information as well. So that's the difference between saying Marzano and Pickering in 2007 versus Marzano and Pickering in Educational Leadership 2007. You may even want to consider including the publication in the citations you read, even if the tournament doesn't require it, because judges appreciate it, and it won't be a huge adjustment for you when you are required to read them. Now, when you type out the citations in the written evidence, you must include full MLA or APA citations, in addition to the qualifications of the author, for any evidence you introduce into the debate round. Internet sources must also include the title of the website, database, or access point, the date accessed, and the web address. The additional citation required for online sources must appear on all evidence, but doesn't necessarily need to be read. You may note from previous experience that finding all the citation information on a web page can be a challenge. Not all pages include things like the author's qualifications, page numbers, or even dates. So here's a good rule. The less publication information is available on the web page, the less reputable the resource is. As you know, there's a lot of information on the internet, and when it comes to professional research, there's also a lot of bad information on the internet. Therefore, you are expected to use only high-quality research. That means no blogs, website comments, personal websites, advertisements, personal opinions, etc. At a minimum, you must be able to provide the following citation elements: author, authors or organization, author's qualifications, title of article or web page, publication, date of publication, and URL. If any of these are missing from a resource you find, you may have stumbled upon a resource that cannot be used in a debate round, no matter how wonderful the evidence is. An easy mnemonic device to remember each of the citation elements is the sentence, "All quick tigers promptly devour unicorns." And the letters U, Q, T, P, D, and U stands for author, qualification, title, publication, date, and the URL. So far, we've covered the tagline and the citation. So now let's move on to talk about the body of the evidence. The body of the evidence is the most important part. A closer look at the evidence reveals some additional formatting, such as bolding and underlining, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But first, let's take a look at what we cut from the original article. You can see that I included the full text and I did not chop up paragraphs or use ellipses. Ellipses are the ... that research sometimes use to cut out irrelevant portions of the text that they are citing. So a 10-sentence paragraph might be reduced to sentences 1 through 3 followed by ellipses, where sentences 4 through 8 were, followed by sentences 9 and 10. In academic research, ellipses allow researchers to save room and focus on the attention on the most important parts of the paragraph. But in the world of competitive debate, the other team will want to see the full paragraph to make sure that all of the author's claims and warrants are presented honestly and in full. For this reason, ellipses are not allowed in evidence unless they were used in the original document. So let's take a look at the original and compare it to the final cutting of evidence. You can see that I took the entire section titled "The Dangers of Ignoring Research." I start with the sentence, "Certainly, inappropriate homework may produce little or no benefit." And I end with the sentence, "To enact effective homework policies, however, schools and districts must address the following issues." And everything in between is included. Now here's an incredibly important lesson. In your debate career, you will come across hundreds of pieces of evidence that cannot be used because they contain one or more words that discount, negate, or contradict the point you are wanting to make. And you may have the temptation to delete, change, add, or adjust the author's original wording to help the evidence say what you want it to say. Under no circumstances is this permissible, and the consequences for adding, omitting, or changing any wording for any reason include disqualification from the tournament, suspension from your debate program, and maybe even academic consequences from the administration for violating the school's plagiarism policy. It would prevent you from getting into the National Honor Society, and it would go into your permanent academic records. I don't take it lightly, and in the rare cases when it's happened in my career, I have sought the maximum punishment. You need to hear me say clearly and without equivocation that changing or altering evidence is unethical and not permissible in any circumstance. Equally damaging is the loss of respect from your peers in the debate community. If it happens even once, you get a reputation that cannot be undone. And in an era of electronic debate where teams are researching the same sources you are, there's a pretty good chance that the opposing team has a copy of the original evidence on their computer, which makes it pretty easy for them to prove academic dishonesty. So to review. You are not allowed in any way to alter the author's words to suit your needs. I think we're pretty clear on that point, so let's move on and take a look at the formatting I've used to mark the card. We've just talked about how important it is to include full paragraphs, and sometimes even the full pages of the author's original text. But there's a difference between including all of the author's original text and reading all of the author's original text out loud in a speech. You may not have realized it yet, but you will often be asked by the opposing team to provide your evidence to them for inspection, and you will ask the same thing of the other team. Although it is important to provide evidence to the opposing team so that they can see the full context of the author's words, it isn't practical to read page after page of evidence just to present a few important sentences. So debaters format their cards in a way that indicates which part should be read out loud and which part should not be read. In the example I provided, I included two formatting features, bold and underline. Therefore, the text that is bold and underlined should be read out loud, and the text that is not formatted would not be read out loud. As a side note, if you encounter evidence that has no formatting, you can either format the evidence yourself prior to the tournament, or you can read the entire block of text. If you see a piece of evidence that's really short, like only a few sentences, it's probably not good evidence, and whoever cut the card may have intentionally taken the evidence out of context. So it's a good idea to track down the original source to either see the larger context or recut the evidence so that it includes the surrounding text, even if you only end up reading those original few sentences. You will also note that I have omitted formatting in the middle of a sentence. Let's take a closer look at that fourth sentence. I've chosen not to include the words "of homework" with "no homework" and the words "of the knowledge addressed in that class." Does this violate the rule about not taking the words out of context? No, because in both cases, the unformatted words do not change the meaning of the formatted words. And in a speech where you want to maximize the amount of argumentation, it is acceptable to skip over unimportant words or phrases within a sentence as long as 1, the unformatted words in no way change the meaning of the formatted words, and 2, you present the full original text to the opposing team when requested. Now, when it comes to time to read the evidence out loud, it sounds like this. Cooper and colleagues, 2006, comparison indicates that the average student in a class in which appropriate homework was assigned would score 23 percentile points higher on tests than the average student in a class in which homework was not assigned. Again, note that the words "homework" with "no homework" does not change the author's meaning when not formatted, and neither does the phrase "of the knowledge addressed in that class." Had the evidence contained the word "not," as in "homework does not make a difference," and the debater reformatted the text to exclude the reading of the word "not," as in "homework does make a difference," this would be another example of a violation of debate, program, and school rules and ethics, and the same consequences would apply. There is one more important concept to teach before we end today's video, and that's the concept of marking and clipping cards. Understanding this concept requires you to understand two other concepts. First, it is common practice to provide the evidence to the other team. If both teams are using laptops, the evidence is usually shared on a flash drive before the speech begins. If both of the teams are using paper, the paper evidence is usually shared after the speech and returned before the next speech. If one of the teams is using laptops and the other team is using paper, the team that is still using laptops needs to share their evidence, either by giving up one of their laptops after their speech or bringing a third laptop called a viewing laptop so that the other team can inspect the evidence. The second concept is a basic rule of debate. A judge can only consider the evidence that is actually read out loud in the round. If it isn't read out loud in a round, it doesn't count. It doesn't exist as far as the judge or the other team is concerned. This presents a bit of a problem for debaters who shared their evidence electronically, but who then need to make adjustments mid-speech. And that might include not reading some pieces of evidence and only reading portions of other pieces of evidence. It is up to both teams to follow along and keep track of which pieces of evidence were read. But if the debater reads only part of a piece of evidence, it is important that he or she clearly says, "Mark the evidence there," to indicate where in the paragraph the speaker stopped reading. This allows the opposing team to specifically mark the evidence so that everyone knows exactly what and wasn't read. It is considered unethical to clip cards, which means to contend that part or all or some evidence was read, even if it wasn't. Clipping evidence is bad, and as long as the debaters are paying attention and communicating with their partners and the other team, clipping should never be an issue in the round. So now that you know how to cut and format evidence, it's time for you to find evidence on this year's resolution and begin winning rounds using great evidence. But before you do so, take a moment to review the major terms in today's video. Evidence. Card versus piece of evidence. Claim. Warrant. Tagline. Power tagging. Citation. MLA written citation versus citation read aloud during speeches. Body. Ethical cutting of evidence. Ellipses. Formatting. And clipping cards. That's all for now, debaters. Good luck.